At Manhattan University, a graduate degree is not out of reach. You'll gain real-world skills, credentials employers value, and connections to New York City's top companies. Choose from their new Master of Science degrees in Healthcare Informatics, Digital Marketing and Analytics, Business Analytics, or Financial Analytics, all built around hands-on learning and industry partnerships. Graduate ready to lead, not just work. Take the next step at manhattan.edu/graduate. Manhattan University. Lead the future.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me. Taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
You are diving headfirst into the deep end of the Stone Zone. Late last week, the New York Times breathlessly reported that Lindsay Halligan is under investigation by the Florida bar. They had very red faces the next day when they were forced essentially to report that the Florida bar denies that there's any ongoing investigation of Lindsay Halligan. But perhaps I need to remind you who Lindsay Halligan is and why this is significant. You see, Eric Siebert was the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, and he was charged with investigating and potentially prosecuting the case of FBI Director James Comey. You see, Comey said under oath before the U.S. Senate, when asked if he had ever transmitted classified information to any third party and directed that third party to give it to the media, he specifically said no. Yet an investigation produced both emails and an admission that Comey had passed classified information designed to put Donald Trump in a poor light to Daniel Richman, a longtime friend and advisor of the president. And therefore, Comey was quite vulnerable to the same charges they brought against me, the violation of the False Statements Act. However, the U.S. Attorney, Siebert, who was charged with investigating crime, never disclosed that he had a glaring conflict of interest, that his father-in-law, his wife's father, was not only the godfather to James Comey's daughter, but had also represented Comey briefly as his personal attorney. That would normally eliminate a prosecutor. They would recuse themselves from such a case. Rather than do so, Eric Siebert was preparing a 50-page brief on why deep stater James Comey should not be charged in that crime. So he was fired by President Donald Trump. He claimed that he resigned, but if so, he resigned hours ahead of being terminated. And the president appointed Halligan, a White House lawyer. Now, the media immediately began to denigrate Halligan as an insurance lawyer, trying to imply that she was some kind of ambulance chaser, unqualified for this position. She is indeed a former beauty queen. She's a statuesque beauty. They seem to hold that against her as well. But she also was a senior partner in a Virginia law firm in charge of their civil litigation practice with a specialty in mortgage law and real estate law, which became very handy in her subsequent investigation into New York Attorney General Letitia James. In order to proceed on that case, it's a pretty straightforward case. And once again, Halligan took evidence to a grand jury that voted to indict Comey. And she took evidence in the Letitia James case, where essentially James had signed documents under oath claiming that she would live in, as a full-time residence, a Virginia home she purchased, thus getting a lower mortgage rate and a lower tax rate and a tax break. But of course, if she lived in Virginia, she would be constitutionally unqualified to be the Attorney General of New York. In fact, James had a 43 record of serial mortgage fraud, had lied about both residential properties that she owned, had failed to report a number of significant mortgages on her New York State required disclosure forms. So in the end, the only way that they could get those two cases dismissed in the deep state was to get a judge to rule that Halligan's appointment was somehow improper under the Federal Vacancies Act, a judicial decision that, quite frankly, is just wrong. It's on appeal, and it will be overturned on appeal. But in the meantime, I think it is important to kind of look at the actions of the three judges in this case, because I've never quite seen anything like it. Judge Michael Nachmanoff was the main judge. For some reason, they brought in a judge from an entirely different jurisdiction, from South Carolina, a Judge McGowan Curry, and last but not worst, Judge William Fitzpatrick, to say that these three federal judges engaged in an attack on this indictment that was based with conjecture, prohibited media narratives, personalized attacks on the U.S. attorney, and procedural anomalies that have no precedent anywhere in federal criminal practice. In other words, these judges violated the judicial canon of ethics, which require neutrality, certain other ethical obligations, and they had a constitutional rule to be fair in the case of the grand jury. Judges cannot say from the bench that they read something in the newspaper or saw it on TV. They are supposed to, by law, to learn everything about the facts from the briefings and the written briefings and what happens in the law room. But Judge Nachmanoff continually referred to things that he had read in the media. According to Canon 3, judges cannot lie on external reporting. Canon 3 specifically prohibits it. In another case, you could see how one-sided the proceeding was. The judge interrupted Lindsay Halligan repeatedly whenever she tried to speak. The judge never once interrupted the defense. He continued to silence the Attorney General, kept misstating her records, he kept prejudging her prosecutorial independence from the bench. These are personal attacks from the bench, all prohibited under the standard court rules. Then there was Judge Cameron McGowan Curry. For some reason, she was brought in from South Carolina. She also engaged in personal attacks on Halligan. An overwhelming media presence describes her as a White House aide who has no prosecutorial experience. That's not legal reasoning. It was character assassination. It would have nothing to do about the evidence that was presented to the grand jury. She also pointed repeatedly to abundant newspaper reporting. But the worst of them all was a Judge William G. Fitzpatrick. He engaged in distortion, conjecture, false misleading minutes, and other ethical breaches. He actually claimed that the indictment was invalid because there had not been a quorum of grand jurors present, and that there was a missing gap in the audio version of the grand jury proceedings. When Halligan tried to respond, the judge told her to sit down and shut up. That afternoon, the court was required to file a public apology for their being incorrect. The judge also took a quote, cut it in half to give it two different meanings. The part that he barred from the record was, of course, dispositive. This is a violation of Canon 2A, which requires integrity and avoidance of speculation. The judges rested entirely on conjecture rather than evidence. Also, a violation of Canon 3A. Findings must be based on the court record. So, I guess my message to the New York Times and Josh Bromwich, who breathlessly reported this case, that Lindsay Halligan was under investigation by the Florida Bar, which is a lowly smear because she's done nothing wrong other than serve her country. That attack was, of course, a setup. This was being pushed by one of the many nonprofits funded but with dark money by George Soros. Very, very specifically, in this case, an operative pushed this narrative. Her name, let's grab this real quickly. Very interesting operation. This is lawfare. This is where they file these attacks against you that are baseless, knowing that it takes you time and money to fight them. And that's what I believe it is. Citizens for Accountability was the first operation that made this claim. The Michelle Cupper-Smith, who is not an attorney but is the chief hit woman for CFA, the Campaign for Accountability, and other front organizations, have engaged here in lawfare. In other words, file bar complaints as a nuisance, which is what this is. However, I saw today that any citizen can file a grievance against a judge. I think anyone who looks at these three Virginia judges ought to consider such a formal complaint because the smearing of Lindsay Halligan is outrageous, completely and totally outrageous, and to seek to have her disbarred on the basis of false claims is outrageous. There is no pending bar examination, said a spokeswoman for the Florida bar situation. The situation is extraordinary.
At Manhattan University, a graduate degree is not out of reach. You'll gain real-world skills, credentials employers value, and connections to New York City's top companies. Choose from their new Master of Science degrees in healthcare informatics, digital marketing and analytics, business analytics, or financial analytics, all built around hands-on learning and industry partnerships. Graduate ready to lead, not just work. Take the next step at manhattan.edu/graduate. Manhattan University. Lead the future.